Priya Venkataraman was 31 years old when she disappeared. She had come to the United States from Hyderabad, India in 2015, holding a degree in biochemistry from Osmania University and a dependent visa tied entirely to her husband's immigration sponsorship. She spoke three languages, Telugu, Hindi, and English, and had, in the 4 years since arriving in Tucson, Arizona, built a quiet life inside a beige two-story house on Saguaro Ridge Drive. She had no criminal record, no history of mental illness, and no documented pattern of impulsive behavior. People who knew her described her as deliberate, careful, someone who thought through consequences before acting. She had been waiting for her green card interview since the day she landed. That interview was scheduled for March 12, 2019. She disappeared on March 4th. Her husband, Devraj Menon, was 40 years old. He had emigrated from Kerala a decade earlier, obtained a work visa through a staffing agency, and eventually secured a permanent position as a senior data analyst at Freight Access Solutions, a mid-sized logistics firm headquartered in Tucson. He was known at Freight Access as efficient and self-contained. His manager described him in a later interview as someone who never missed a deadline and never asked for help. His colleagues remembered him as polite, in the way that people are polite when they have decided to reveal nothing. He drove a gray Nissan Altima, left the house every morning at the same time, and returned at predictable hours. Neighbors on Saguaro Ridge Drive recalled no arguments, no disturbances, no signs of anything other than an ordinary household operating on an ordinary schedule. Camilla Reyes was 34, a paralegal at a small immigration law firm in central Tucson. She had met Priya 2 years earlier through a community outreach event organized by the firm, where Priya had come seeking information about her visa status. The professional relationship had become a friendship. Camilla was the person Priya called when she needed to understand a document, and later, the person she called when she needed to understand her options. In the weeks before March 4th, Camilla had noticed Priya carrying a prepaid phone she had not seen before. She had not asked about it directly. Soren Dahl was 28, a doctoral candidate in environmental science at the University of Arizona. He was Danish, had been in Tucson for 3 years, and had met Priya at the university library in the spring of 2018. By his own later account, they had met regularly over the following months, always in public spaces, always to discuss her situation. He had no prior contact with law enforcement and no criminal history. His name did not appear in any part of the initial investigation. Detective Aaron Kurtz was 44 and had worked in the Tucson Police Department's Crimes Against Persons unit for 17 years. He had a reputation among colleagues for working cases slowly and thoroughly, a habit that had occasionally frustrated supervisors, but had also produced convictions in cases other detectives had closed as unsolvable. He read every file twice before making his first call. He did not work with a partner. When Priya Venkataraman's missing persons report landed on his desk on March 7, 2019, he read it twice, noted the immigration appointment date, and picked up the phone. Patricia Lowe was a family law attorney based in Scottsdale who had been practicing for 19 years, specializing in high-asset divorce proceedings. She had no prior connection to the Menon household. Her name appeared in Devraj's phone records from a consultation that took place in January 2019. The house on Saguaro Ridge Drive had no security system. Devraj had declined the monitoring service when they moved in, citing cost. The street had no residential cameras. The nearest surveillance infrastructure was a camera mounted on the exterior of a parking structure adjacent to Freight Access Solutions, installed by the building management company in 2017 to monitor employee vehicle access. That camera recorded continuously, stored footage on a 30-day rolling cycle, and had never been accessed by law enforcement before March 2019. The marriage between Priya Venkataraman and Devraj Menon had not begun as a controlled environment. In the early years, by accounts from Priya's contacts in Hyderabad and from messages later recovered from her personal email archive, she had described the relationship in neutral terms: functional, stable, unremarkable, in the way that many arranged marriages are unremarkable at the start. She had arrived in Tucson in August 2015 with 2 suitcases and the expectation that the visa situation would resolve itself within a year or two. It did not. The green card petition moved through the system at the pace that such petitions move, which is to say slowly, and with each passing month, the structural imbalance between Priya and Devraj became more fixed. Devraj was the petitioner. Without his active sponsorship, the application collapsed. He had explained this to Priya in the first weeks after she arrived, in a tone she later described to Camilla as informational rather than threatening. He was simply making sure she understood the facts. The facts were, she could not work without employment authorization, which was contingent on the green card, which was contingent on him. She could not establish independent credit. She could not sign a lease. She could not open certain types of accounts without a co-signer. Every financial instrument that required documentation of legal status routed back through Devraj. He managed the household accounts. He reviewed the monthly statements. He gave Priya a debit card linked to a joint account with a spending limit he set and periodically adjusted. This arrangement had not been imposed suddenly. It had accumulated incrementally over 4 years, each step individually justifiable, collectively forming a structure from which exit required planning rather than impulse. By 2018, Priya had begun that planning. The first documented indication of her intent appears in a message sent to a relative in Hyderabad in April 2018, recovered later from a cloud backup. She wrote that she was looking into her options. She did not use the word divorce. She used the phrase becoming independent. The relative later told investigators she had not understood the significance of the message at the time. In May 2018, Priya began attending a weekly reading group at the University of Arizona Library. It was there that she met Soren Dahl. Their earliest conversations, reconstructed from library sign-in records and later confirmed by both parties, were brief and incidental. By July, they were meeting deliberately, and by September, Priya had begun describing her situation to him in detail. Soren was not a lawyer. He was not a counselor. But he listened, and he had access to resources she did not. And he began making inquiries on her behalf, contacting a legal aid organization, identifying a domestic violence shelter that accepted women on dependent visas, researching the procedural question of what happened to a green card application if the petitioning spouse withdrew during the process. The answer to that last question was unambiguous. If Devraj withdrew the petition before the interview, Priya's case closed. If she filed for divorce before the interview and Devraj contested the application, the process became complicated and protracted. The safest path, from a purely procedural standpoint, was to wait until after the interview, when conditional approval would give her independent standing. The interview was scheduled for March 12, 2019. At some point in late 2018, Priya concluded that she could not wait without resources. She opened an account at a credit union in central Tucson under her maiden name, Venkataraman, using her passport as identification. Between November 2018 and February 2019, she made 23 transfers into that account, ranging from $40 to $300, drawn from cash she had accumulated by underreporting household expenses to Devraj. The total reached $34,200 by the end of February. 3 additional deposits, totaling $18,000, came from wire transfers originating from an LLC called Dahl Consulting Group, Soren's personal business entity, established years earlier for freelance environmental consulting work. In February 2019, Priya asked Camila Reyes to hold a sealed manila envelope and not open it unless something happened. She did not define what something meant. Camila took the envelope and kept it in her desk drawer at home. She did not ask questions, because Priya's tone made clear that questions were not what she needed. On February 28, 2019, someone using a P.O. box registered under a variation of Devraj Menon's middle name placed an online order for 2 liters of a commercial-grade enzymatic cleaner, available only through janitorial supply channels. The order was processed the same day and delivered within 48 hours. On the morning of March 4th, Priya Venkataraman sent Camila a text message from her prepaid phone. It read, "Today is the day I tell him." She did not send another message after that. Devraj Menon arrived at the Freight Access Solutions parking structure at 6:48 a.m. on March 4, 2019. The exterior camera mounted on the building's employee entrance recorded his gray Nissan Altima entering the lot and pulling into his assigned space. The timestamp was automatic, generated by the camera's internal clock, which building management records confirmed had been calibrated the previous October. He badged into the building at 6:51 a.m. The access log registered his entry. Both records would later be subpoenaed by the Tucson Police Department and entered into evidence without dispute. At 6:31 a.m., 17 minutes before he arrived at Freight Access, Devraj had accessed Priya's personal email account from the shared home computer. The access was logged by the email provider's servers, which recorded the IP address, device fingerprint, and timestamp of every login. The account used a saved password stored in the browser. He had been in the account for 11 minutes. During that window, he read the full exchange between Priya and Soren Dahl. He saw the shelter contact. He saw the legal aid referral. He saw the discussion of the credit union account. He saw the wire transfer amounts. He saw the plan, in its entirety, laid out across months of correspondence. He also saw in the sent folder of Priya's prepaid phone account, which she had linked to the same email address, the text message she had already sent to Camila Reyes that morning. Today is the day I tell him. He closed the browser, picked up his keys, and drove to work. At 8:03 a.m., the same parking structure camera recorded his Nissan Altima leaving the lot. The direction of travel placed him heading west, towards Saguaro Ridge Drive. The drive from Freight Access to the house was 11 minutes under normal traffic conditions. A traffic camera mounted at the intersection of Saguaro Ridge Drive and Conestoga Road, a city-operated signal camera maintained by the Tucson Department of Transportation, recorded his vehicle turning onto Saguaro Ridge Drive at 8:14 a.m. The trunk of the Altima, visible through the rear window in the camera frame, appeared loaded. The image resolution was sufficient to confirm the vehicle's make, model, and plate, but not to identify the contents of the trunk with precision. That footage was recovered by Detective Kurtz 6 days later through a formal records request to the Transportation Department. At 9:49 a.m., the same intersection camera recorded the Altima leaving Saguaro Ridge Drive. The trunk area, visible in the same frame angle, was unobstructed. At 9:51 a.m., the Freight Access parking structure camera recorded the vehicle returning to the employee lot. Devraj badged back into the building at 9:54 a.m. The gap between his departure and return, 1 hour and 48 minutes, did not appear in any account he subsequently gave to investigators. He did not mention leaving the building. He did not mention returning home. When asked by Detective Kurtz where he had been on the morning of March 4th, he said he had been at his desk by 7 and had not left the building until the end of his shift. The medical examiner, Dr. Nora Finch, would later place Priya Venkataraman's time of death between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. on March 4th. The cause of death was manual strangulation. There were no defensive wounds on Priya's hands or forearms, consistent with a prolonged struggle. Dr. Finch's report noted that the absence of such wounds, combined with the manner of death, suggested the victim had not anticipated the physical confrontation before it was already underway. Camila Reyes waited until 10 p.m. on March 4th before calling Priya's number. There was no answer. She called 4 more times before midnight, alternating between the prepaid number and Priya's regular phone. Neither connected. On the morning of March 5th, she drove to Saguaro Ridge Drive. Devraj answered the door in a pressed shirt. He told her Priya had gone to visit a cousin in California. He said it without hesitation. Camila asked which cousin. He said he did not remember the name. She stood at the door for a moment, then thanked him and left. She went directly to the Tucson Police Department and filed a missing persons report. The report was entered into the system as low priority. Priya was an adult. There were no signs of forced entry at the residence. People left their homes. The file was assigned 36 hours later, on March 7th, to Detective Aaron Kurtz. He read it twice. He noted the green card interview date. He noted the text message Camila had described, sent the morning of the disappearance. He noted that Devraj had provided no verifiable name or location for the cousin in California. He picked up the phone and called Freight Access Solutions to arrange an interview. Kurtz spent March 8th pulling records. The parking structure request went to the building management company through a standard law enforcement inquiry form. The footage came back the same afternoon, a 12-hour segment from March 4th. covering the employee entrance from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. He watched it in sequence, without skipping. The Altima arrived at 6:48 a.m. It left at 8:03 a.m. It returned at 9:51 a.m. He watched it 3 times to confirm the timestamps against the camera's internal clock record, which the management company had included in the transfer. There was no technical ambiguity. Devraj Menon had left Freight Access Solutions on the morning his wife disappeared, returned an hour and 48 minutes later, and told investigators he had never left the building. Kurtz submitted the cell tower request for both phones through the TPD's Digital Forensics Unit the same evening. The results came back on March 9th. Priya's regular phone had last pinged a tower, serving the area around Speedway Boulevard and Wilmot Road at 7:52 a.m. on March 4th. After that, the device went offline. No further pings, no location data, no network activity of any kind. The pattern was consistent with a battery removal or physical destruction of the device. Devraj's phone had registered activity on the same tower corridor between 8:10 and 8:40 a.m. on March 4th. The geographic overlap between the two devices during that window placed them within the same cell coverage zone, which included Saguaro Ridge Drive. On the morning of March 9th, Kurtz appeared before a Pima County judge and presented an affidavit supporting a search warrant for the Menon residence. The warrant was granted at 10:14 a.m. The search team entered the property at 1:30 p.m. Devraj was at Freight Access at the time. He was not notified in advance. The search produced 3 significant findings. In the garage, beneath a wooden workbench, investigators located a single latex glove. It was the same brand as a box found under the kitchen sink. 14 gloves remaining in a box that originally held 16. One glove had been used and left under the workbench. The second was unaccounted for. In the kitchen, the forensic team disassembled the drain trap beneath the sink and recovered residue consistent with a commercial-grade enzymatic cleaner. A sample was sent to the state crime lab for composition analysis. In the backyard, along the rear fence line, a section of soil approximately 6 feet in length showed surface disturbance inconsistent with the surrounding ground. The grass in that area had been removed and replaced, but the replacement was recent enough that the root structure had not reestablished. A forensic geologist brought to the scene that afternoon confirmed the disturbance was not consistent with natural settling or routine yard maintenance. Ground-penetrating radar was requested through the Pima County Sheriff's Office and deployed the following morning, March 10th. The scan confirmed a void at a depth of approximately 4 feet beneath the disturbed section of soil. The excavation team began work at 9 a.m. At 11:47 a.m., at a depth of 3 feet and 9 inches, they reached a layer of black contractor-grade plastic bags secured with zip ties. The bags contained the body of Priya Venkataraman. She was identified through fingerprints matched against her visa application records on file with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Dr. Nora Finch conducted the autopsy that afternoon. Her findings were documented in a report filed the following day. Cause of death: manual strangulation. The hyoid bone was fractured. Petechial hemorrhaging was present in both eyes. There were no defensive wounds on the hands or forearms. Time of death was estimated between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. on March 4th, based on gastric content analysis and the degree of early decomposition relative to ambient soil temperature. The time window aligned precisely with the period during which Devraj's vehicle was absent from the Freight Access parking structure and present in the Saguaro Ridge Drive corridor, as recorded by the Conestoga Road traffic camera. Devraj Menon was arrested at his office at Freight Access Solutions at 3:20 p.m. on March 10th. 2 uniformed officers and Kurtz entered through the main reception. Devraj was at his desk. He stood when they entered the room, looked at Kurtz directly, and said nothing. He was handcuffed without resistance. His composure did not change between the moment of arrest and the moment he was seated in the patrol vehicle. He requested an attorney before any questions were asked and did not speak again without counsel present. The crime lab returned the drain residue analysis on March 12th, the date that had been marked on Priya's immigration calendar as her green card interview. The compound matched the composition of the enzymatic cleaner ordered on February 28th from the janitorial supply company. The arrest of Devraj Menon on March 10th closed the immediate investigative phase and opened the evidentiary one. Kurtz spent the following 3 weeks working backward through the financial and digital record, looking not for what had happened, that had been established, but for when the decision had been made and what had driven it. The answer required pulling threads that had no obvious connection to the physical evidence recovered from the backyard on Saguaro Ridge Drive. Priya's financial records were obtained through a court order on March 13th. The credit union account registered under her maiden name, Venkataraman, had been opened on November 3, 2018. Between that date and February 27, 2019, 23 deposits had been made, ranging in individual amounts from $40 to $300. The pattern was deliberate. No two consecutive deposits were the same amount, and no single deposit was large enough to trigger the credit union's automated monitoring threshold. The total from those deposits was $34,200. 3 additional wire transfers, each arriving on separate dates between December 2018 and February 2019, added $18,000 to the balance. The originating routing number traced to Dahl Consulting Group, a registered LLC in Arizona under Soren Dahl's name. Kurtz returned to Soren Dahl on March 15th. The first interview, conducted at Soren's campus apartment on March 8th, had established his role as a logistical contact, someone who had helped Priya identify resources and plan her exit. The second interview, conducted at TPD headquarters with a recorded transcript, was different in register. Kurtz placed the wire transfer records on the table and asked Soren to explain the origin and purpose of the payments. Soren did not hesitate. He confirmed that he had transferred the money from his personal consulting income, that Priya had asked him not to use any platform that would generate a paper trail connected to her regular accounts, and that the funds were intended to give her financial independence immediately after the green card interview. He provided email records documenting every transfer decision. He again denied any romantic involvement. Kurtz reviewed the email records, cross-referenced them against the correspondence already recovered from Priya's account, and found no inconsistency. Soren Dahl was removed from the suspect pool. The more consequential discovery came from Devraj's work laptop, seized from his Freight Access office on March 10th under the terms of the search warrant, which had been extended to cover his workplace devices. The forensic analysis of the laptop, completed by the TPD digital unit on March 18th, identified a browser session initiated at 6:31 a.m. on March 4th from the home network IP address. The session had accessed Priya's email account using a saved credential stored in the shared browser profile on the home computer. The session lasted 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, the account's server logs recorded activity consistent with the sequential opening of multiple email threads. The correspondence with Soren, the shelter inquiry, the legal aid referral, and the sent folder containing the text message Priya had already dispatched to Camila Reyes that morning. The question Kurtz had been working toward was not whether Devraj had known about Priya's plan on the morning of March 4th. The email logs confirmed that he had. The question was whether the murder had been a reactive decision triggered by that discovery, or whether it had been planned in advance, and the email access had simply confirmed a timeline Devraj had already committed to. The physical evidence answered that question without ambiguity. The enzymatic cleaner had been ordered February 28th. The soil disturbance in the backyard, as assessed by the forensic geologist, was consistent with excavation that had occurred between 48 and 72 hours before the body was placed, meaning the grave had been prepared between March 1st and March 3rd, before Devraj read Priya's emails on the morning of March 4th. The latex glove found under the workbench had been there long enough to accumulate a thin layer of garage dust on its outer surface. The preparation had preceded the trigger. The motive's financial dimension emerged from a subpoena served on Freight Access Solutions on March 19th, requesting Devraj's complete HR file. The file contained his February 2019 application for a senior director position within the company. The role carried a compensation increase, an equity component, and a requirement for a background and security clearance review, a process that included verification of all information provided in the application. Devraj had listed his marital status as married. A change in that status during an active clearance review would have flagged the application and triggered additional scrutiny. More critically, The HR file contained the beneficiary designation form for the company-sponsored life insurance policy, a document that employees were required to update annually. Devraj had submitted an updated form on January 17, 2019. The named beneficiary was himself. The policy's death benefit was $400,000. Kurtz requested the original beneficiary designation on file prior to the January 17th update. The previous form, submitted in 2016, had listed Priya Venkataraman as the sole beneficiary. The change had been made 3 days before Devraj's consultation with divorce attorney Patricia Lowe on January 20th. Lowe, interviewed a second time under a narrower privilege waiver negotiated by the prosecutor's office, confirmed that Devraj had asked her specifically what legal mechanisms existed to dissolve a marriage without triggering automatic notification to a dependent visa holder's immigration case. He had also asked whether a divorce filing could be structured to prevent the non-citizen spouse from making financial claims against jointly held assets during the pendency of the immigration process. Lowe had advised him that no such clean mechanism existed under Arizona law. The consultation had lasted 40 minutes. He had not retained her. Trial began on September 9, 2019, in Pima County Superior Court. Jury selection took 4 days. Opening statements were delivered on September 13th. Osei's opening laid out the sequence in chronological order. The insurance beneficiary change on January 17th, the attorney consultation on January 20th, the cleaner order on February 28th, the grave preparation between March 1 and March 3rd, the email access at 6:31 a.m. on March 4th, the parking structure departure at 8:03 a.m., the traffic camera recording at 8:14 a.m., the return at 9:51 a.m., and the insurance claim filed on March 15th. She did not use the word monster. She did not characterize Devraj's state of mind. She described a sequence of documented actions and told the jury that the evidence would speak in the order in which it had occurred. Blaine's opening centered on the absence of direct physical evidence connecting Devraj to the act of strangulation. No fingerprints had been recovered from the zip ties. The latex glove found under the workbench contained no recoverable DNA from its interior surface. The enzymatic cleaner had degraded the biological material in the kitchen drain beyond usable analysis. The traffic camera image, he argued, was insufficiently resolved to establish what the trunk contained. He told the jury that the prosecution's case was a construction of inferences, not a chain of proof, and that Soren Dahl, a man who had secretly transferred $18,000 to the victim and whose whereabouts on the morning of March 4th had not been verified by camera footage, had not been adequately eliminated as an alternative suspect. Kurtz testified over 2 days, September 16th and 17th. He walked through each evidentiary item in the order it had been obtained, explaining the investigative steps that had led to each discovery without editorializing. He described the parking structure footage, the cell tower overlap, the digital forensics establishing the 6:31 a.m. email access, the grave preparation timeline as determined by the forensic geologist, the P.O. box registration, and the HR file sequence, the beneficiary change, followed 3 days later by the attorney consultation. On cross-examination, Blaine pressed him on the Soren Dahl alternative. Kurtz stated that Dahl's cell phone data placed him at his campus apartment on the morning of March 4th, that his building's keycard access log confirmed he had not left until 11:20 a.m., and that no camera in the Saguaro Ridge Drive corridor had recorded his vehicle in the area on that date. The insurance carrier's records supervisor testified on September 23rd. He confirmed that the $400,000 policy had been active on March 4, 2019, that the beneficiary designation had been updated to Devraj Menon on January 17th, and that a claim had been submitted by Devraj on March 15th, 11 days after Priya's disappearance, and before any court had issued a declaration of death. The claim form had been completed accurately in every field except one. The cause of death had been listed as undetermined, a categorization that, the supervisor noted, was procedurally available only after a medical examiner's ruling, a ruling that had not yet been issued on March 15th because the body had been recovered only 5 days earlier and the autopsy report had not been finalized. Devraj had filed the claim before the official cause of death existed as a documented fact. Camila Reyes testified on September 25th. She described her friendship with Priya, the prepaid phone, the sealed envelope, and the text message she received at 7:14 a.m. on March 4th. She opened the envelope in court, as she had been instructed to do by the prosecution, and read Priya's handwritten note into the record. The note described 14 specific incidents of financial restriction across a 4-year period, each dated and described in Priya's handwriting. The photograph of the bruising on Priya's left arm, dated February 12, 2019, was admitted as Exhibit 31. Camilla read the note in its entirety, without interruption. The courtroom was quiet throughout. The jury began deliberations on October 14, 2019. They deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. On October 22, 2019, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder with the financial gain special circumstance. Sentencing was held on November 18, 2019. Devraj Menon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He made no statement at sentencing. The $400,000 insurance claim was denied by the carrier under Arizona's Slayer statute, which bars a person who feloniously kills another from benefiting from that person's death through insurance proceeds. The Freight Access Solutions Senior Director application, still pending at the time of the arrest, was withdrawn by the company on March 11, 2019, the day after Devraj's arrest. The $3,400 accumulated in Priya's credit union account, along with the $18,000 transferred by Soren Dahl, was released by court order to Priya's family in Hyderabad, following the conclusion of the trial. The funds Priya had spent 14 months assembling, dollar by careful dollar, were returned to the people who had known her before she came to Tucson. Her green card interview had been scheduled for March 12, 2019. The appointment was never rescheduled. The case was closed.